Hi, friends. We are back, and I have a new phone, so we should be able to get through this Christ is All You Need book just fine. So, thank you, Karen, for my birthday gift, and I appreciate it so much. With chapter 6, The Good Shepherd, John 10:11. I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I grew up on a farm. I'm sure that is a surprise to many of you since I don't sound like a farm girl. But there is a reason for that. It wasn't a normal farm. It was an exotic animal game preserve. At least I think that's what we called it. I grew up on 40 acres in the suburb of Chicago, and at that time we were surrounded by farmland. My father, however, wasn't a farmer, and the property we bought wasn't necessarily a working farm. But it did have a barn and a chicken house. In order to keep the taxes on the land down, Dad had to figure out how to use the land and not just let it sit. He tried growing a tree farm, but that didn't work. Then he stocked the land with exotic animals, which, hang on here, which gave the land a game preserve status and kept his taxes from going through the roof. It took us a couple of years to figure out that there should be a fence separating the animals from our house and an in-ground pool. Perhaps it was when the 8-point elk fell through the tarp on the pool one winter, or the 10th time we pulled into the garage to find the yaks cooling themselves on the cement floor. But once we figured it out, my life was a lot less exciting and far safer. We had zebras, camels, llama, alpaca, several different kinds of deer, Hawaiian 4-horned sheep, wallabies, horses, geese, swans, peacocks, elk, yaks, and a few dogs. You know, the typical farm next door. I could fill this book with amusing stories that were generated from living on this preserve, and perhaps I'll write that book another day. Right now, I want to talk about our sheep. As the different herds grew, occasionally we would sell off some of them, which meant the men who worked on our property had to round them up to be taken away. That was always an exciting day. I'm not really sure why, but at one point Dad decided to sell the Hawaiian 4-horned sheep. And yes, they did have 4 horns. 2 that curled around on the side of their heads, and 2 that stuck straight out several inches. They were interesting to look at, but why they were called Hawaiian, I will never know. Maybe they came with legs. So the property manager herded up the sheep, and they were picked up by a big truck and taken away. 4 of the sheep, however, refused to follow the crowd, and so we ended up keeping those 4. Now, I don't know a lot about sheep, but I don't think they are overly smart. The 4 remaining little guys melded into our herd of Japanese Sitka deer and lived out the rest of their existence, thoroughly convinced that they were indeed deer and not sheep. This was evident by the change in their habits. Instead of drinking at the creek and grazing all day, like they had done previously, they adapted to a much more rigorous exercise regime, running to and fro in the fields, hiding in the woods, and licking salt blocks. Probably the most comical adjustment they made to their new life was mimicking their fellow herd members as they pranced across the field. Have you ever seen a deer really take off running and suddenly they lift all 4 legs and project their bodies by barely letting their hooves touch the ground? If you haven't seen it in real life, you've seen it in cartoons. It's the movement that cartoon animals do when they are in love. And I'm thinking of Pepe Le Pew. Remember the skunk? I call it prancing. And guess what? Hawaiian 4-horned sheep can prance. It's not pretty, but it's pretty funny. All 4 legs off the ground during a dead run, prancing across the field as if they were in love. In reality, they were just trying to keep up with their lighter, faster counterparts. But it was a very funny sight to see. As well as not being very smart, sheep also don't have good instincts. They need to be led. I have actually heard the word stupid associated with sheep more than any other word. I don't want to offend the world of sheep, but every indication is that left to their own accord, they would not survive very long. Enter the shepherd. He is the one who tends and cares for the sheep. If you study scripture, there are some very famous Old Testament shepherds. Abel was the first, and he was a man of character, a man who pleased the Lord. Abraham may not have tended the flocks himself, but we know he employed many shepherds because he and Lot had to part ways, part company due to their flocks. Jacob was a masterful shepherd, and Rachel even tended her father's sheep. Move out of Genesis, and you find that Moses did his share of herd watching, and David also held that occupation before becoming a king. Step into the New Testament, and the reputation of the shepherd shifts a bit. I have always been taught that the shepherds of Christ's time were the lowest on the social totem pole. They were usually thieves who couldn't find better positions, which makes the announcement of Jesus' birth by the angels to the shepherds very interesting. Yet the possession of the sheep was still a valuable commodity. just lost my place. Oh. For they provided meat for food, wool for clothing, and were the objects of the Jewish sacrificial system. With the New Testament as our background, for Christ's arrival, to call him the Good Shepherd doesn't sound like a compliment. Perhaps he would have been in good company in the Old Testament, but not the New Testament. However, I don't think his role as shepherd has as much to do with the occupation itself as it has to do with the object of his affection, the sheep, meaning us, which makes us stupid. Okay, I'm going to end there, and we'll pick up again tomorrow. So let's see if I can get this downloaded much quicker and off to you guys to enjoy. And again, I'm really glad we get to continue this, and the Lord is faithful and good, isn't he? Until tomorrow.